Hello everyone and welcome to Victoria 3. There have been a variety of updates to the game so far, and with some of those in mind, I think that the starting strategy for a couple nations, Russia in particular, has changed quite a bit, so I wanted to make a video, sort of a beginner's guide, about a couple different aspects of the game, from politics to economy to government to even technology, on how to deal with the update and what that means for a Russia player. So first off, just talking about the geopolitical situation, we are not really in that good of a spot. So if we're looking at it, our only available alliance partners are Prussia, Austria, and, Great Qing, but even some of those that show up green really don't mean it. So for example, Qing has a negative 1000 modifier, but we could technically ask them because we have nice relations. It doesn't really mean anything. Your only really viable alliance partner off the bat is Austria, and I do recommend you take it. So in order to get it, we're going to have to owe them an obligation, but that is fine. Let's just go ahead and do that. And then the only other thing that is really notable at the start for politics is that we do have the Grand Duchy of Finland. Now, the Grand Duchy of Finland is pretty weak. The GDP is not too terrible, honestly, but 10 battalions is just abysmal, and I would recommend just kind of ignoring these guys for right now. We don't have enough taxation capacity or even administrative capacity, or rather bureaucracy, to handle the states that we do have. And that's the next thing that I really want to talk about. If we go into state actions here, you can see there are 26 different states that we can incorporate. What this means is that all of these states are not paying their taxes right now. All of them. Every single one that shows up in green is not paying their taxes. You can see what this means if you hover over your money. So unrealized taxes comes from a lack of ability to collect taxes in places. Some of this comes from insufficient taxation capacity inside a province, and we'll talk about that too, but some of it just comes from unincorporated states. So we do want to incorporate those, and then in order to deal with our inefficient taxation capacity, we have to either build more government buildings, but as you guys can see, that's a tall demand given the sheer amount of taxation capacity that we don't have, or address it through technology. So in terms of technology, Russia starts out very, very backward, and you can see that immediately. Society research is pretty far behind. Military, we don't have general staff. As far as I'm aware, the only other great power that starts without general staff is, I think, Austria. The rest do, and if we are going to fight Western powers, we do need that very, very quickly. And then production methods are also backwards. We not only don't have railways, we don't have anything approaching railways. But even though we're that far behind in terms of production, what I would recommend is going with central archives. The singular reason for this is it increases your taxation capacity when you switch your production method, and it also increases your bureaucracy. And institutions in this game are very, very powerful. They're very tricky for Russia to manage. So if we look at institutions, every single increased level of institution that we get requires another 430 bureaucracy investment, and that number is only going to rise with increasing population. So we want to try to get improved bureaucracy methods very early on, build a lot of government buildings, build a lot of paper to try to really push those things forward. Otherwise, you'll end up in the late game with too many radicals, not enough loyalists, and really just in over your head. So since we are on the political stage, let's take a look at government, and this is one of the things that has been reworked in the new patch earlier this month. So I guess government legitimacy sort of used to not matter all that much. It was really easy to cheese, it was really easy to get political parties that should never be working together to work together. And what you can see right now is, off the bat, I have the Orthodox Church working with the Gentry Assembly. This is not how it starts. I've already done this. I've already reformed my government. It gave me 0 radicals, 0 loyalists, and did not affect my legitimacy because these guys are relatively ideologically aligned. What it does allow you to do, because of the changes to legitimacy, where having between 90 and 100 decreases your law enactment time by 50%, is it allows you to effectively switch the order where you want to do laws for Russia. Because the old strategy, or at least, what I did back in the day, was go over to laws and immediately get rid of serfdom. And you can see you can get as high as 21.3% chance, rather closer to 20, if you get the rural folk, industrialists, and intelligentsia into the government. That's not great, but it's not terrible, and it's a good starting spot. But that was before we could get such a reduction in our enactment time. Now I think it's far better. You can see I have bolstered the rural folk, bolstered the industrialists, bolstered the intelligentsia, and then the intention is, before you do anything with serfdom, scroll down here, we'll get the Orthodox Church in, and you can do charity hospitals. It's a low chance, but there's very little opposition, so it's not really going to radicalize many people. The industrialists, yeah, they'll get a little radicalized, but that's fine. And or you can go for a dedicated police force. Now this one I recommend as your first switch. And here's why. If we go over and we take a look into laws, and you take a look at your police, right now we have no police, and that's, not great. Local police force increases the power of the Gentry Assembly, but dedicated police forces doesn't. So it gets you that decrease in radicals, decrease in state penalties from turmoil, without increasing the power of the Gentry Assembly, which is what we want to weaken right now, right? So it's an easy switch. There is a drawback to this, which is it's going to spike your bureaucracy costs, but if you start off researching central archives, it's really not the worst thing. If you don't want to do that, still get the clergy in on the government, and I would recommend going for charity hospitals. The reason for this is if we look right now at our population, we're going up by about 0.13% annually, which is abysmal. We want to be at more of like 0.6, 0.7, which we can easily get to with charity hospitals. It's one of the, I think, best hospital systems in the game, and it does increase the power of the Orthodox Church, but right now that's actually a good thing. We want everybody doing as well as they can, except for the Gentry Assembly, and that's going to help us weaken serfdom. So if you do this and you go through passing those laws, and let's say you have middling luck, it's kind of average, it takes a couple of years to get those two through, by that time, the last couple times I've tried this, by about 39 or 40, you can get serfdom up to about 30 to 35 starting chance, which is way easier to avoid a whole bunch of negative events. Also, because the opposition has reduced clout, you have a lower risk of things like an early revolution or just massive amounts of unrest in your country. So that handles the government. Now let's talk about early wars and early expansion. The obvious one is the Kazakhs, and if you go into your colonies, you can very easily add colonies here and just push your way through the Kazakhs, and that's fine. It does decrease the speed, so the way colonialism works is your country generates colonialism points per your investment in the colonialism institution, and then those are divided up amongst each of your colonies. So we will have slowed down our colonization by adding in the additional colonies. But I think that's fine. I think it's better to work on multiple places at once for it. The other thing that we can do is, since we've allied Austria, we can attack Persia. I'm not going to show it here, but I've tried this about 3 or 4 times, and 3 out of those 4 times, if you go in and you go for a diplomatic play against Persia with Make Puppet, they'll just back down right off the start, like day 1, without unpausing. If you ally Austria, you can just go in. The Ottomans usually won't come in against them. The 4th time that that I tried this, they did. It was a long war, but you can win it. But if you get a Persian puppet right off the bat, this does a couple of things. For one, they'll pay you about 8,000 to 9,000 weekly, which is really good for an early economy because early economies do struggle. And secondly, it gives you access to opium. So eventually we're going to come in here, we're going to annex our puppet, Persia, and you'll see this actually in the multiplayer that'll come out in a little bit. I've already puppeted Persia in that playthrough, but if you look at the state of Mazarandan, you have, where are they? Opium plantations right here, and also sort of scattered across, yes, in the state of Fars, opium plantations, and this is critical, because later on in the game, without direct player ownership of this region of the world, opium plantations really don't get much production, they don't get much play, and because of that, it's very difficult to import opium. What that means is if you go over into your barracks, unless you directly own opium farms, or plantations rather, it's going to be very hard to get off of basic wound dressing, which means that you're going to take horrendous attrition every time you go to war. That attrition cycles down into more radicals, into a worse workforce, and a worse economy. So you definitely want control of the Middle East, and Russia is in a prime spot to get it. So the last thing that we're going to talk about, just to keep this not terribly long, is production. So I've went ahead and I've switched over from wooden to iron frame buildings. I recommend you do this. It's a massive increase to your construction. There are a couple issues with it though, and chief among them are tool shortages and iron shortages. So if you take a look first at our market and look at market prices, yes, clothes are expensive, yes, groceries are expensive, but the one that's going to hurt us the most is tools. When we build these 2 additional construction sectors, the demand for tools will go up even more, and so we have right behind that 2 different tooling workshops, all of this built in Moscow. I tend to build everything I can in Moscow proper until it starts to push up against your market access, because we don't yet have railways to get rid of that. and then go from there to whatever state you want to develop second. And it can be something like Kiev, although this is a different culture, or it could be something like Ingria, which has St. Petersburg, of course, on the Neva River up north, and just bop between those two until you run into market access problems again, though hopefully by that time you'll be well on your way to building rail. Okay, so that is about it. I will say a couple other things. Don't mind your low literacy until you've gotten rid of serfdom. There's really not much that you can do about it. You also can't pass an education system before then. That's why we only talked about charity hospitals and not also religious schools, which I do recommend as soon as you can and as soon as you've gotten rid of serfdom. The second thing is that your relative GDP. So if you look right now, we are number 4 worldwide, but we're in a pretty good spot. So Qing is ahead of us because duh, East India Company because duh, it's just massive amounts of population for both of those, over twice what we have for East India, and what, 6 or 7 times for Great Qing. But we are very competitive with France and Great Britain, particularly with France, where we actually outstrip them a little bit in terms of GDP. This is not a race that you can win as Russia off the bat. France is going to pass you. It's going to be really annoying, but it's just going to happen. They already have rail. They have way more modern production methods. And while Russia is playing catch up, there's not going to be much that a Russian player can do to stay to stay ahead of them or to try to beat them to number 1 world power for GDP. So don't worry about it too much, it's going to be fine, and then once you're done in the Kazakhs and you want to expand, take a look at Sakhalin and Hokkaido, but I'd also recommend taking a look at Sulawesi, and then once you've taken Persia, this opens the door into Khiva, Bukhara, Afghanistan, and Kalat, and I would just recommend Puppet first, and then Annex later, particularly Annex once you've already handled the problem with not having incorporated states. So do this first, get a strong base, and build off of it slowly, steadily, and wake that Russian bear. So that's all we've got for you guys today. If you like this, please don't hesitate to leave a like, share, subscribe. I also do have a Discord and a Patreon these days, although, you know, it's tiny and all that, but we will be doing a multiplayer campaign with me and a buddy. I'm playing as Russia, he's going to play as France, I believe, and we'll come to blows. It should be a good thing, but that's all we've got for you guys today, so thank you all for hanging around, and we'll see you again real soon.